If you think you can hand in an AI essay to your English teacher and we're not going to notice, we will. And in this video, I'm going to show you how. Now, obviously, as much as ChatGPT and Claude and all these other AI writing tools are getting better, so too are the technologies that will catch you. ChatGPT Zero, Originality AI, Turnitin software. There's a whole host of things that we can run your work through and we will probably catch you using AI. But even without those technologies, I'm going to show you the telltale giveaway signs that we can spot your work is AI generated without using any of that detection software. Keep watching to the very end because one or two things might surprise you. So for the purposes of this video, I decided to use Claude. Generally, recently, I've been using Claude more than ChatGPT. I just feel that the writing style is slightly got the edge. And I asked it to generate me a grade 9 essay on the topic of the supernatural in Macbeth. A pretty standard topic. This is the kind of thing that you would get in an IGCSE English literature exam. So I said, generate me a grade 9 standard essay on the title, Explore the Significance of the Supernatural in Macbeth. And what it gave me was, in printed form, barely a side and a half. Now, I have said in previous videos, you are able to get a grade 9 essay, you are able to get top marks by writing as succinctly and concisely as possible, and that's always a good thing. But to me, this seems as though it's very compact. So perhaps if this is meant to be a grade 9 essay, already the warning signs are there is a lot going on here in a very succinct and concise space, which already goes against what I would expect from my students. Particularly even grade 9 students are not able to always write as succinctly as this. So I'm going to use a yellow highlighter because I'm going to highlight some neon things, like neon signs, things that jump out or really illuminate themselves as being a little bit askew. So what have we got? The supernatural is a profoundly significant element in Shakespeare's Macbeth, functioning simultaneously as a dramatic device, a vehicle for exploring Jacobean anxieties, and a lens through which the audience examines the corrupting nature of unchecked ambition. Right, I would say I haven't even got to the end of the first paragraph, and already we've got a tricolon opener. What that means is the essay opens with a perfectly balanced three-part noun phrase. The supernatural plays a very important role in Macbeth. No 14, 15-year-old constructs a tricolon in their opening sentence instinctively. So the tricolon bit is Macbeth functioning simultaneously as a dramatic device, a vehicle for exploring Jacobean anxieties, and a lens through which the audience examines the corrupting nature of unchecked ambitions. 1, 2, 3 things. AI seems to default to that structure because it sounds sophisticated and it sounds nice and complete and tidy, but generally, even with grade 9, with A-star students, I never see that in an opening paragraph. So that to me already would be a dead giveaway. Shakespeare harnesses the supernatural not merely as spectacle, but as a structural and thematic scaffold upon which the entire tragedy is constructed. Not merely, but. To me, that appears again constantly in AI writing. It performs a kind of intellectual elevation, dismissing the obvious reading before offering a superior one. Students rarely deploy this move. They're more obvious than that, and almost never in the opening paragraph. So as slick and as polished as this sounds, even if this was one of the more able students in my class, straight away there would be a couple of alarm bells in that opening paragraph. Where do we go next? The play's opening immediately establishes the supernatural as central to its dramatic architecture. Dramatic architecture, that's a literary criticism term from academic journals. This is meant to be GCSE standard work. I wouldn't even expect that in A-level or an IB response, not GCSE. AI, again, you get these phrases where they use metaphors, scaffolding, framework, foundation with unusual frequency, because it kind of signals analytical sophistication without requiring any sort of genuine argument yet. I mean, we are moving towards a quotation, which is what I would expect. The Witcher's paradoxical proclamation, fair is foul and foul is fair, inverts the natural moral order and functions as a thesis statement for the play as a whole. Right. No GCSE student would call a quote a thesis statement. That is the language, meta-language borrowed from higher level literary analysis. That's the kind of language I would expect to see at IB level or A level. A real student would write something like this shows or this suggests. They wouldn't be talking about thesis statements. They wouldn't be reaching for discourse about the function of argumentative writing. The chanting trochaic tetrameter, a meter that deliberately subverts the iambic pentameter associated with noble characters, signals that the witches exist outside civilized society and its conventions. Now, it's not beyond the realms of possibility that a top student would understand trochaic tetrameter and iambic pentameter being syllabic structure of certain phrasing in Shakespeare, but I would say it's genuinely quite rare for GCSE students to be launching into that level of detailed structural analysis before more closely and more obviously analysing the quotation. Students, particularly even higher level students, tend to get the details around trochaic tetrameter wrong, or they describe it vaguely or entirely not correctly, but here it's exactly correct. And I know that sounds at odds as what we're trying to strive for at grade 9 or A-star level, but you know, generally students do slip up and make minor errors, which you would expect to see. Contextually, King James I's Demonology, 1597, is codified widespread Jacobean fears of witchcraft, and Shakespeare's deployment of the supernatural would have registered not as fantasy, but as genuine theological threat to a contemporary audience deeply invested in questions of divine order and damnation. Again, I'm not disputing that it might well be the case in terms of context that you've been taught that, because I know with my own students, we do teach context, the divine right of kings. We do teach the great chain of being and all of that kind of stuff. But I would say real students either forget context entirely, or they bolt it on awkwardly towards the end, or they misremember details. The fact that this is integrated seamlessly, it's all exactly correctly with the date references, the spelling is even correct, seems a little bit too perfect to me. Furthermore, the supernatural operates as an externalization of Macbeth's internal psychology. Right, we're entering into psychological register here. This Macbeth's internal psychology. It's clinical, it's almost psychoanalytical language. It's very precise, it's impressive. But it's really unnatural for a GCSE student who's not been trained in either literary or psychoanalytic language. AI does tend to reach for these psychological frameworks instinctively because they are prevalent in the academic text it's been trained on. And remember, it's drawing from countless texts, it's scrolling the internet, and this is absolutely correct, but it doesn't fit with the style and the stage of this essay being GCSE. The dagger vision, is this a dagger which I see before me? The handle lowered towards my hand is deliberately rendered ambiguous by Shakespeare, who refuses to confirm whether the apparition is supernatural in origin or a heat-oppressed brain, conjuring guilt into visible form. This ambiguity is structurally significant. It positions the audience as complete interpreters, unable to distinguish Macbeth's psychological collapse from genuine supernatural intervention. I mean, that is pretty good. That's a really slick paragraph. AI almost always presents exactly two equally weighted interpretations balanced against each other. So the fact that this is very symmetrical, I would say real students argue for one side at the behest of the other. Their arguments are rarely so neatly and conveniently balanced. This move of Shakespeare refusing to confirm one thing or the other, leaving the audience to decide, is a signature AI analytical gesture, I would say. It sounds very sophisticated, but it carefully avoids commitment. And that's a problem with the literature essay, because we obviously want to know what you think or have felt, not just this rather ambivalent, sitting on the fence observation of two sides of an argument. Shakespeare further develops this supernatural's significance through Banquo's ghost at the banquet scene, which marks a structural turning point in the play. The ghost's silence is particularly devastating. Unlike the witches, who speak and thereby grant Macbeth agency to choose his fate, Banquo's apparition is mute, denying Macbeth the rationalization he craves. This is an interesting one, because this is... Where are we? Ghost silence. This is AI analyzing silence. So rather than what is present, which is a high-order literary move, it's analyzing what isn't. So this is quite telling. AI is drawing on a precise structural contrast between two supernatural elements, the witches and the ghost, in one sentence. This comparative microanalysis within one paragraph is almost never seen, even at a grade 9 A-star standard. It's just too slick. The public nature of Macbeth's breakdown, which of you have done this, shatters the performative control he has maintained throughout. And Lady Macbeth's desperate attempts to manage the court's perception underscore how the supernatural has migrated from the private realm of conscience into the public realm of political power. I have never seen a student talking about performative control, even at the highest levels. This is drawing on Judith Butler's theory of performativity. If you've done media studies, you might know what I'm talking about. But this is a concept from gender studies, from philosophy. Now, there is an outside chance a teacher has taught that, particularly if, like me, you've taught media studies in the past, or if you've taught psychology, but it's very, very rare. Even at the highest levels, I wouldn't see that. I would say that is a significant red flag. And it's exactly correct. The precision here is too good. Shakespeare uses form here with precision, the fragmentation of Macbeth's speech rhythms, his lines breaking from measured verse into erratic outbursts, mirrors the disintegration of his authority. This is a very, very slick statement to make with regards to structure. And then how neatly that structure mirrors something about the character. Students, even higher ability students, tend to veer away from writing about structure more at the behest of writing about language features. So to me, that also is too slick a line. The Witch's prophecies also raise profound questions about free will and determinism that would have resonated with a Jacobean audience steeped in Calvinist theology. Right. In the same way that you've got this reference to theorists with performative control, this is a phrase that requires very detailed and specific knowledge of Reformation religious history. It's a phrase, you're just not going to see. You might have a very rare case of a student who's really into theology and would know about that. It might be a very specific case where a teacher has taught that, but I have never seen that before. That to me stands out too obviously. It's the kind of contextual detail that might appear again in A-level or IB, probably more undergraduate essay level, but certainly not in a GCSE response. A real student would have written something more simplistic like, people believe in God and fate. And actually that would be mark-worthy, they would get credit for that. When the apparitions in Act 4 proclaim that none of woman born shall harm Macbeth, Shakespeare contrasts a dramatic irony that is simultaneously reassuring and fatal. The prophecies do not compel Macbeth to act, rather they provide him with the theological scaffolding to justify actions he was already inclined toward. This nuanced free will argument, the argument the prophecies don't determine Macbeth's fate, but instead provide post hoc justification for pre-existing desires, that's just lifted straight out of Spark Notes. That to me sounds like something in Cliff's Notes. Every major online study guide, this AI model has absorbed them and spat them out into this paragraph. I mean, the argument, again, is very correct, but suspiciously polished. I think that seems to be the overriding message so far. This is too slick. Shakespeare thus implicates the supernatural in a broader interrogation of moral responsibility. If fate is ordained, can Macbeth be truly culpable? That's a bit of a giveaway, the rhetorical questions. Now, that's not to say students don't do that, but it's generally, I would say it's bad form to ask questions, be they rhetorical or otherwise, in an essay. But that to me, again, sounds as though the AI model has lifted it from a study guide, because that's something I would generally dissuade my students from doing. Lady Macbeth's invocation in Act 1, Scene 5, "Come you spirits that tend on mortal thoughts and sex me here," reveals the supernatural as a source of transgressive power, particularly in relation to gender. Transgressive power. That to me, again, is gender studies, it's cultural theory language. It's absolutely correct, but it's not GCSE level. Look at the exact act and scene citation. AI seems to always be able to pick the very precise location of every single quote. Students rarely do that. They might do it infrequently, but typically students misremember, or they would omit act or scene references. That seems too obvious. Her appeal to be filled with diarist cruelty and have her milk replaced with gall inverts the maternal and feminine to construct a figure who exceeds the boundaries of acceptable womanhood. Jacobean audiences would have recognised this language as consistent with the discourse of witchcraft. Women who renounced their natural roles were considered most susceptible to demonic influence. Again, that's a really good, really slick, too slick, I would say. The word discourse here stands out to me as being something that typically a GCSE student wouldn't say. It's used perfectly, but there's no explanation. So this signals that the model is drawing on academic sources. No student, or very rarely would I see a GCSE student use that word. Final paragraph. Ultimately, the significance of the supernatural in Macbeth lies in its refusal to be contained within a single interpretive framework. Almost every AI-generated essay that I read concludes with ultimately, or in conclusion. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but it then moves on to this idea of the significance of something lies in its refusal to be reduced to something else. This formula asserts that the text resists simple interpretation. This is AI's favourite way to sound conclusive, but without sounding non-committal. And actually, one of the things I teach my students to do is to try and squeeze some degree of personal response or personal engagement into the conclusion, and that's not happening here. It's sounding complex, but it's not demonstrating individual thought and feeling, and that's fundamentally where AI breaks down, I think. And then finally, it is at once a theatrical spectacle catering to Jacobean credulity, a psychological projection of guilt and ambition, a structural mechanism that drives tragedy forward, and a philosophical instrument through which Shakespeare interrogates fate, free will, and moral culpability. This 4-part summary list, again, it's very AI. The X to the Y to the Z. This is too structurally tidy. It sounds algorithmic. A human's conclusion would wander, and very often, especially at GCSE level, a student repeats themselves, because I'm always criticising students to avoid repeating what they've already said in the essay. None of that is present here. It's too tidy. It's AI wrapping everything up in a nice, complete paragraph, almost like a contents page. The supernatural does not simply haunt Macbeth, it constitutes the very atmosphere in which his tragedy becomes possible, dissolving the boundary between the world as it is and the world as his ambition demands it to be. That's a very, I would say, a very poetic, this last, does not simply haunt Macbeth, the atmosphere. It sounds too poetic, it sounds too carefully constructed. It's dissolving the boundary, the ambition. It's really slick, it's very lyrical, it's very metaphor driven. I would say this is very reliably AI as well. Now again, another dead giveaway for AI, and I haven't mentioned it yet, but I will, is the absolute plethora of hyphenation all the way through. Typically students who are trying to evade teachers noticing that will get rid of that and replace them with commas or semicolons, but that's a big giveaway that's littered all the way through. And as I say, it's very concise, it's very, very neatly packaged, there's a lot going on there, but there is a complete absence of personal engagement. Where are the I thought, I felt statements? In English literature, we are always about what you have thought about a text, a character, a theme. How have you engaged with it as a reader or as a member of the audience? So despite this purportedly being grade 9, I couldn't give that a grade because to me, there are several things that stand out about this being too obviously AI generated. I hope that video has been illuminating, and I hope it dissuades you from using AI too heavily in the future. The two things I want to end on are this. The biggest giveaway that your work is AI is the mismatch between your ability and your teacher knowing you and what you can do and what you present to them. So forget about the detection software, forget about everything I've even just noticed in this AI generated essay. Your teacher will know you better than you think. It only takes a couple of weeks for them to gauge your ability, so they will know what you can and cannot do. And if you present something that illustrates a big mismatch between what they understand of your ability and what's on that page, then that's a dead giveaway. The final thing to say is, of course, at present, you will still sit IGCSE, GCSE, A-level, IB exams in an exam room, probably handwritten with a pen and paper. So if you use these technologies or overuse these technologies in the run-up to those exams, you're really only cheating yourself, because fundamentally you're not going to have access to any of that in an exam. So if you rely too heavily on it in the run-up to those exams, then you're only doing yourself out of the practice as to how to write well on your own. If you've enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up and a like. If you've got any questions or anything you'd like to say, drop it in the comments below and I'll do my best to read them and answer as many as I can. Hit the bell notification for any new videos that I put out, and please subscribe and share the video amongst your friends. See you next time.